Shalom from Jerusalem. My name is Albert Wexler. I'm the director of Jerusalem Prayer Breakfast, and we are here to give answers for our allies. We are at the Friends of Zion Museum, and with me is a fantastic couple. I'm so happy that you came, Danny and Ayalon. Now, I mean, you have done, so many amazing things during your lifetime. I mean, you guys have a fantastic resume. I mean, we could talk about it, but you've been a career diplomat. You've been our ambassador at the United States. You've been the deputy foreign minister. Some say the real foreign minister, and you are the director of the Christian Friends of Magen, David Adom, which is the equivalent of the Red Cross of Israel, but it's the Red Star of David. So good to have you here. I'm really happy.
Thank you.
Now, when you walked in, you said that the World War has started. Can you elaborate?
Well, I would say there are different manifestations of World War, and a global struggle has not started with Gaza. Actually, it started long before that. And you see it across many seam lines. You see it in the Ukraine, you see it in Syria and Iraq, you see it in Yemen, you see it in the Sahel in North Africa, you see it in Libya, and there are two very clear, I would say, forces here. One is a force of evil. It's the jihadist, most extreme, radical Islamist powers, which are actually financed, orchestrated, and everything is planned in Tehran, the Ayatollahs of Tehran, the most extreme and dangerous regime in the annals of history, just like the Nazis were. And they are just using their proxies, whether it's Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza, you have the Houthis in Yemen, you have the Shia Iranian militias in Syria and Iraq, and they are also in, as we mentioned, you have Boko Haram in Nigeria, for instance, they're in Africa, everywhere. And on the other hand, you have, I would say, the Judeo-Christian world. You have the liberal democracies led by the United States. You have the European Western democracies, and you have Israel. And it's a very, very clear cut that those Islamists, they just want to take over. For them, there is no compromise, there is no negotiations, there is no coexistence, it's do or die, and this is what we face.
Well, we heard very optimistic, speeches from our Prime Minister at the United Nations about normalization with the Arab world,
Right.
new Middle East. I mean, I got a little bit concerned because I remember those proclamations by Yitzhak Rabin, by Shimon Peres. I always get a little bit, uncomfortable when somebody speaks of such positive outcomes, and look, 7th of October hits us unprepared.
And it's very much connected. Every time there is a hope for a better Middle East, for a real peace with the Middle East, at least with the relatively moderate Sunni regimes like the Saudis, every time there is a chance for peace, then the Iranians, the jihadists, will do everything to scuttle, to explode, to just derail it. And this is exactly what they did with Gaza.
Was it also the oil prices that they could not compete with if the Saudi normalization would have gone through, Saudi oil coming through Israel to the whole world? Much cheaper, isn't it?
Well, Robert, now you dig even deeper, because unfortunately we have all this Islamist world, the jihadist world led by Iran, backed by two world powers, which are China and Russia. And this is exactly for oil prices, for control of the waterways, of the commercial routes. This is exactly it, the domination. And we have here these two powers. Russia is giving a lot of military and political aid to the Islamists, including Hamas, including Hezbollah, including, of course, Iran. And you have the Chinese, who gives it a lot of economic benefit and support.
Now, I remember you had some trouble with the Turkish ambassador. just remember those pictures from our media. But you could foresee the trouble coming because a NATO country, Turkey, why have they swerved into that camp of Russia?
Because of Islamism. We've had very good relationship with the Turks until 2002 when Erdogan took over. And Erdogan, the president of Turkey, is an Islamist. His party, AKP, the Party of Justice and Peace, is a Hamas-type party. They have the same ideology of the Muslim Brotherhood. So Erdogan is a Muslim Brotherhood, except Muslim Brotherhoods could be either Arab, like Hamas, or Islamic Jihad, and could be AKP, like Turk. So he's a Turkish Hamas. That's what it is. And overnight, he took Turkey into a totally different way of radical Islam, and this is where the trouble began, not just with Israel, but with Europe and with the United States.
Danny, we spoke about this at our earlier program, that you were a very close confidant and an advisor to Ariel Sharon. And you saw this whole process of disengagement from Gaza from inside. And I was actually asking you then, was it his decision? Was it, imposed on him somehow? You mentioned it was his decision.
Yes, it was his decision because at the time, we were talking about 2000, it germinated at around 2003. Because at that time, it was in the wake of the Second Intifada, the worst violence of the Palestinian Authority since Oslo started, and this was also shocking. After Camp David in 2000, we gave them everything they wanted. We really were working for two-state solutions for two peoples with prosperity and dignity for everybody, respect for everybody, and of course, security and a good relationship. But it wasn't good enough for them. Again, we go back to the Islamism of do or die, no compromise. So they started this intifada. The Europeans and in the international community, they started working on a roadmap to peace. And there was a danger of a lot of pressure on Israel. And the idea was that we have to do something, to have the initiative. Instead of somebody else trying to impose a plan for us, we should initiate. And when you look at the geopolitics, it makes sense. Gaza is a place that there's no future there for Jewish lives, unfortunately. Although there is an old synagogue there, but it wasn't part of the biblical land. It wasn't part and parcel of the biblical land. And there were only 8,500 Jews living there, surrounded by 2 million Palestinians. So it was not tenable, it was not sustainable. And the idea was, we will leave Gaza altogether, and this will give the Palestinians maybe a chance to prove to the world that they can govern themselves, they have their own territory, and they can live, with us in peace and build a future for themselves. They were thinking of turning Gaza into a Singapore, with all the assets that they have. And, of course, we tried to negotiate that with Abu Mazen of the Palestinian Authority. Before that, it was Arafat. There was nobody to talk to. For them, it was nothing. No, no, no. And we decided to do it with the United States. So the agreement actually was between Israel and the United States.
Unilaterally withdrawing.
Yes. And the Americans saw the benefit from that and the chance to really change the dynamics in the relationship between Israelis and Palestinians. And they agreed to do that. And they also, the part of the deal was that they will recognize the major Jewish population centers in Judea and Samaria. So this was the deal. We gave up Gaza, and we gained recognition by the United States. The President of the United States, George W. Bush, sent a letter, which is a legal document of the United States recognizing Israel's population centers in
I
Judea
remember,
and Samaria.
I remember Obama had some trouble remembering that this was a
Yes,
legal document.
unfortunately, that was the case, and during his time, peace interests were not furthered, quite the contrary. But still, we have this document, and I believe that any future settlement, any future political settlement with the Palestinians will be based on the letter of President Bush to Mr. Sharon in April of 2004.
It's definitely a lesson that Israel learned and also showed the whole world. Look, we did walk out of Gaza. We pulled everybody out of Gaza, the living and the dead, and look what happened. I mean, you cannot give a clearer exposure of the very character of Hamas and of all what they represent.
Absolutely, and and we left Gaza. We left all the infrastructure. There was a lot of agriculture infrastructure there, greenhouses, and industrial infrastructure. All this was given to them freely. We left everything intact. Again, with the hope that they will build a nation there. But unfortunately, what happened was that Hamas in Gaza took over. The Palestinian Authority, which is weak now and was even weaker then, or the other way around, they are weak all the time, they succumbed to Hamas overnight. Hamas actually perpetrated a coup d'etat, so they took over. They burned up all the facilities that we left, instead of taking it for themselves, to give employment to their own people, to export vegetables and fruits and build hotels for tourism industry. They burned out everything and they launched on, I would say, building the largest bunker ever in history. They turned the entire Gaza into a huge underground bunker. And from there, launched missiles over us, sent death squads of terrorists like they did in 7th of October, and there was no relent. So we gave the land. We hope to help them in peace, and with the industrial cooperation, they didn't want it. So what is the lesson here, Albert, is they don't want their own independence. They don't want to build a state. They want to destroy a state, which is ours.
Well, they definitely have a very different worldview and very different goals than what the West has ever understood. Now, Anne, you have been a great voice to the Christian communities from Israel. You've been known as such for years, for decades, and your role as the president of the Christian Friends of Mada, it's exemplary. I mean, it's really amazing what you've accomplished. Tell us a little bit what the Christians can do at this time of war.
October 7th wasn't the first time that Israel has been attacked. We've had many times rockets coming over. And Magen Adom has always been there on the front lines and controlling or coordinating all of the emergency relief, the medical relief, the disasters, providing the blood services. And so it's more than just the Red Cross. It's like our 911 and Red Cross combined. And everyone knows about it. When October 7th happened, people lined up at the hospitals to give blood because blood is the first thing that we need to make sure we have. We had 14 ambulances totally destroyed, and we lost 11 MADA workers at this time, staff and volunteers.
They were murdered on 7th.
That were murdered, yes.
On the 7th.
While they were attending, giving treatment to other wounded people down in Be'eri and Ofakim and the other kibbutzim. It was a very hard time for us. While we try to be prepared, it's not something that you can anticipate, such barbaric cruelties. And I'm not going to go into them, but it is something so atrocious we could not comprehend. So what has happened is we have gone now on a very active drive to raise funds for ambulances and for motorcycles and for the equipment, the basic supplies. These ambulances were bullet-ridden and then burned out, and blood everywhere. It was horrific for us. So I'm helping to source even things like gloves and syringes and tourniquets and things like that, which we know are basic tools, supplies that a paramedic needs. And there has been a lot of training with the IDF, and we lift them from the helicopter and back to the hospitals. And it's an amazing organization. 90% of our staff are volunteers. 90%, that's 32,000 people are volunteers.
Amazing.
We could not run the organization without volunteers. And they are paramedics, they are EMTs, they are doctors, nurses, ambulance drivers.
And you are a volunteer.
I'm a volunteer.
A volunteer president.
Oh, yes.
Wonderful.
Yes. For 11 years now.
It's an amazing accomplishment.
Yes.
Well, I didn't know about these 14 ambulances we lost among all the losses of people and personnel, and it's horrible. But you have some better news now from these last days, don't you?
Well, we have been very grateful to the Christian world. The Jews do know they need to support Israel. There is a certain requirement that they support Israel. Christians don't always understand the blessing that they will receive by supporting Israel. And there is a blessing, and you feel it, the gratitude of the people, but also God does return to us the joy and the happiness when we give to the Jewish people and when we support, not just in prayers, which are very important. We feel the support from the prayers, but also the advocacy. When you are going to your congressmen and your senators, to your pastors, when you are coming together and giving voice, here we have all of these protests out on the street. We need the Christians to come out and raise the Israeli flag and say, we're fighting this ugly anti-Semitism. This is against God's word. We need to stand with the Jewish nation.
Absolutely. Now, we saw just recently in Texas, there was a massive rally, pro-Hamas rally.
Yes.
And I mean, we've had Jerusalem prayer breakfasts, 3 of them in Texas. And I would really love to see our friends in Texas to take the Israeli flags, go out San Antonio or Austin or Houston or Dallas. I mean, we have so many good friends.
Yes.
Fantastic friends.
Very strong churches there. Your senators and your congressmen are strong supporters of Israel, so they need to get together and rally there.
It's quite scary, Danny, isn't it, to see how the Islamic world has been stirred up. And I mean, they didn't start these pro-Hamas demonstrations when Israeli land incursion started. They started immediately after October 7th. So they were almost celebrating Hamas's quote-unquote victory.
Very unfortunate, yes. And actually, it's not just after October 7th, even before that. They were rallying in the streets of major American cities with this battle cry, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. That means the annihilation of the Jewish state, you know. Our God-given land is exactly from the river to the sea. And this is what they're aiming at. And what we see here, that the new anti-Semitism is marrying together radical Islam with the classic anti-Semitic, let's say, historic roots, which today we find them in the very far left, unfortunately, as well. These so-called progressives, they are actually going together with the radical Islam against Jews and against Israel.
Well, even looking at these prophetic words, you know, that many of our Christian audience would know about all nations coming against Jerusalem, it looks like pretty realistic in today's terms. Don't you think so, Anne?
I do. I've actually seen many depictions of the Revelations and the four horsemen. And of course, we talk about Gog and Magog, and from the north and from the south. And it is quite frightening when you think that there is this group from Russia and China and Iran and coming together so that China is going to work on Taiwan and Russia on North Korea. And these are solid friends of Israel. So when Danny talks about a war of the world, it could easily grow into a much, much larger.
But we are not there yet. I think we still have a moment that we have the United States backing Israel, their fleet in the Mediterranean nuclear submarine. It looks like we haven't lost all our friends, have we?
Absolutely, and this is why it is so important, and this is why the United States understood that the line on the sand is here, that if there will not be a real resolute answer, if there will not be deterrence, if there will not be coming together of all the allies of democratic countries, then everything can just go down and deteriorate even further. This is why it's so important to win the war on Gaza in a decisive way, that Hezbollah or the North Korean or the Iranians or even the Russians or the Chinese will not further their aggressive against all those countries that they are trying to get, whether it's Taiwan or Eastern Europe or Ukraine. Absolutely.
Now, I heard the Prime Minister Netanyahu say that Israel might need to hold some territories in Gaza because we cannot allow Hamas to rise. There is no vacuum in the political realm. And what's your thoughts about this?
Well, for sure we will need a buffer, because right now the situation is, again, we cannot go back to the situation where just across from the fences of our southern border towns, we will have the terrorists. You know, all they had to do is cross a few yards. It's not even a kilometer. And we believed, you know, on the goodwill that, you know, they will want to have their own lives, they will want to have employment and a good future for their children, but this was not the case. Every round of aggression we have had since the disengagement in 2005 ended with more money given to Hamas from Qatar and other countries in the region. And we thought that would be it. But we were wrong time and time again until the 7th of October, where we realized for them it's just a jihadist war. It's not a matter of economic benefits or any kind of social development, nothing. So, since they were smack dab against our towns, this cannot longer be. So we will need a buffer, probably security buffer, of maybe a kilometer and a half around the Gaza Strip. This is something which I think would be imperative. And then we'll have to look for a different regime. Hamas no longer should be able to govern. A terrorist organization, just like the Nazis were annihilated, so will the Hamas. There is no negotiation with such evil. And unconditional surrender is what is needed. And after that, hopefully, there will be a new regime of Palestinians governing their own affairs in Gaza, but it may take a long time
before
until a new architecture is being built.
Yeah, definitely. It's very hard to think of any groups that can administrate this area. I remember, was it 2006 or 7 when there was some international forces also placed? Was it some observers that ran away when the Hamas took over? Help me.
Absolutely, yes. That was along the Rafah crossings. Mm-hmm. You see, the Rafah crossings is the border between Gaza and the Sinai, which is an Egyptian territory. And they were put there actually to monitor any incoming materials and goods in order to actually not allow Hamas to smuggle in munitions and bombs and all that. But of course, Hamas chased them away. But
they ran away. I mean, there was no backing from anywhere. Was it US? Was it European Union? What kind of?
Was the UN. Was the
UN?
Yes, the UN. And actually the UN has not been proven as a major positive factor here in the region, quite the contrary.
The opposite. Well, you of course, know better than anybody else the UN agreements on our northern border. They were supposed to keep the Hezbollah at the bay.
Right.
And what has happened?
The Second Lebanon War, 2006, ended up with the United Nations Security Council resolution, number 1701, which dictated a buffer zone, and not only that, but the dismantling of all unauthorized militias, armed militias in Lebanon. The first and foremost militia, terror organization in Lebanon is the Hezbollah. But of course, 1701 is not observed. Hezbollah not only did not dismantle, but they have actually regrouped, and they received from Iran hundreds of thousands of munitions and rockets, and they encroached all the way to our fence in the border up north, just the same way as Hamas was against our border in the south. They are coming very close, actually, also to our northern border towns.
So there's no hope of thinking of any UN-led help coming anywhere. I mean, they are unable to even implement their own decisions, are they?
You know, what they do, it's the UNIFIL. UNIFIL is the UN peacekeeping force, but it's not keeping peace, and it's hardly keeping themselves from being attacked and harassed by the Hezbollah terrorists. So all they can do is pretty much send reports, but they have not stopped even one Hezbollah terrorist from coming to the border.
Now there's a growing concern about Lebanon entering the war, and I understand that there's been some hesitancy because it looks like Iran was planning a concerted attack.
Yeah.
Hamas ran ahead of schedule. Have they abandoned their concerted attack plan? Of course, there's no concert anymore, but you think they will enter the war?
Well, they have not abandoned their nefarious mission of destroying the Jewish state, Israel. And Iran is saying it every day. Hamas is saying it, the Hezbollah. Whether they got their act together or not, it's a different story. But at this point, Hamas is very much poised at our border and launching attacks on a daily basis at civilians, killing Israeli civilians. Of course, this is not sustainable. Right now, we're focused on the south because we need to take care of Hamas totally and permanently. And after that, we will have to turn our focus into the northern border to make sure that Hezbollah is no longer there. But Iran, they are the ones controlling.
It's quite a heavy expense on Israeli economy. I heard 4 billion shekel, like $1 billion a day.
Yes, sure. It's a lot. You see, we have actually all our military now is mobilized. We're talking about 400,000 people that are not going to work to produce agriculture, high tech. All this has been ground to a halt because they are in the military. So yes, there is a lot of drain now on the economy, and but we will survive.
But people have been helping the agriculture. I saw the German ambassador picking the tomatoes. It was an amazing act of solidarity.
Right, many volunteers, yes. The civil society in Israel is very strong everywhere. Volunteers in hospitals, volunteers in the fields, in agriculture. Absolutely, absolutely. This is why, and the basis, the foundation of the Israeli economy is very strong.
And I was actually thinking about this, that the day after, well, whenever this day is coming, I hope soon, but many of our Christian friends could actually do something very practical. Donating ambulances is one thing, but also building up these communities that were torched and destroyed.
Sure. The Mata stations were ruined, so we have to rebuild those. And the people there who were working there. So it is a way for them to come in and help the communities, sure.
And I think many Christian organizations, they have these humanitarian branches where they are able to come in, after disasters and build up. And I think there are many who would love to partner with Israel in this time of tragedy and the time of need. I mean, that would be an exciting thing to see, don't you think so?
It's absolutely exciting because Israelis are so welcoming, so warm, and very thoughtful in their discussions and looking at a full picture. And so it's interesting to have conversations with them, even alongside while you're working with them or while you're helping other people. And as Danny said, we're having a very difficult time in the economy. We are not producing. Our daughter, for example, is back in the army in what we call miluim, and
reserve.
In the reserve. So instead of going to university, because the universities have been closed all this time, she is doing her service, which means she is not an active producer for the country at this time. When the war is finished and people come back in, it's a nice time for everyone coming together to help rebuild the country.
Absolutely, that would be an amazing thing to see. Maybe our, Christian friends sending in the volunteer teams, building up. There can be so many things that can be done. I think also, thinking of the trauma that we went through, it's a horrible pain. Every family knows somebody who lost their dear ones or who is taken as a hostages. Now, Danny, I mean, this kind of a scenario, 240 hostages, where is the way out?
Well, the way out, unfortunately, is only pressure on Hamas, because Hamas was toying with us. Again, we're talking about a criminal, ruthless terrorist organization, ISIS-like. Who in their right mind and human being and soul would kidnap 9-month-old babies, pregnant women? One of the women gave birth in Hamas captivity. 85-year-old ladies, Holocaust survivors. These are the hostages that the Hamas keeps. So we tried to put the pressure on the Red Cross. This is the Red Cross, or the International Red Cross in Geneva, job to go and demand their release, to go and demand to go visit, to see how they are, to demand at least a list. Nothing. This is the Hamas employing a psychological warfare on the families in order to create also pressure on the Israeli government. They have been talking on some release, but it was all just a ploy. And it seems like the best way to get them out is through a continued military pressure. And hopefully we will be able to get to them soon, even with our own military, as we advance deeper and deeper into Gaza.
And you wanted to add something?
Yes, I did. We have written to the ICRC, the International Committee of the Red Cross, asking them why they have not made a more determined effort to see our hostages. And also we have written to Guterres in the United Nations, because when he tried to make this equivalence of what happened on October 7th and what we are doing in Gaza, it infuriated us. He talked about how we had shot, our IDF had shot at the Red Crescent ambulances, because we physically have videos of the terrorists loading the Red Crescent ambulances with rockets.
But did he ever condemn our ambulances being attacked?
Well, that was the whole point. He never did. And here we had all of these ambulances destroyed, but there was no condemnation on Hamas.
And no condemnation on Hamas from United Nations, from the Pope.
Right.
This silence is deafening.
It is.
It's horrible to think. I mean, for me, 7th of October is like facing Holocaust. And this brings all of these memories and what we have studied in the history, and the silence of the church, the silence of the international bodies. It's just something that we can't live with.
And we don't understand it.
But
If
we need
you
to
know
yeah.
your Bible, you know you must bless the root, because the root has to be strong in order for the Christian community to flourish. If we're not strong here, we're feeding the branches. So the Christians are not going to blossom.
And of course, Hitler in his time tried to really break that root.
That's right.
Destroy the Jewish communities in Europe and in all world. I mean, he was after the Jews, like the same way like Hamas is, like in a sickening way,
Yes.
Gorging over the death of a Jewish person. I mean, I'm sure you heard this phone call recording where a terrorist used somebody's phone he had just killed, telling his parents what he had done, that he had with his own hands killed 10 Jews. And then the parents were so happy and were just overjoyed over their son's exploits.
Yes.
I mean, it's just...
It's unbelievable. We have these Islamists who cherish death and not life.
And we somehow need to build a whole new security architecture, thinking of the day after.
Yes.
And of course we need our friends' prayers, support.
Yes, and we need to educate the children differently. And we need to re-educate the Gazan children, because they've already been taught to hate and despise and to kill Jews from an early age. So we need to replace the UNRWA schools, and we need to have good people, good Christians come in and help educate these people.
That's a very, very, very good point, because these UN-run schools have just, perpetrated and has really encouraged these kind of crimes that they did on October 7th. So I think there must come a change also in Judea and Samaria, because they are giving the taxpayer money, European Union, American taxpayer money, to the terrorist families that are in Israeli jails. They are educating the children in the very same spirit that Hamas was. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, somehow, I'm just, dreaming, could there be anything like in Kosovo, a type of a K4, type of a more powerful implementation of these international, decisions, or are we stuck with UN forever?
Well, the UN has been quite irrelevant and actually damaging the situation. It is it's not a surprise that the UN has never actually been in the middle of any peace treaties between Israel and its neighbors. Israel has a very good peace treaty with Egypt. The same is with Jordan. The UN was nowhere to be seen. Actually, the UN voted against these peace treaties, and the ones that orchestrated it was the United States. So the UN is not a good body to be here. And it will have to be, just as Anne said, it will have to be a revolution within the Palestinian society. New schools, new curriculum, new thinking of future together and not of killing and death.
Thank you so much for this interview. Thank you so much for giving answers for our allies. And where can people find the MADA information if they want to give an ambulance? I mean, maybe somebody of our audience is thinking, well, I have an ambulance to be given. Why not?
And even lesser amounts for equipment or for a motorcycle. But they can go to our website, which is www.cfmda, Christian Friends of Magen David Adom.com. It's cfmda.com. And on there we have the different elements that they can choose to give for. And we also do dedications on the ambulances. So if you want to give in honor of your parents, my family did that. We donated an ambulance in my parents' memory.
Beautiful.
And it's very meaningful for me. So I know that it is for others as well.
Thank you so much. And of course, we are so thankful to all of you for your prayers. It's a marathon. It's a long run war, and we need you to plan together with us, to stand with us for a long term. Prayer meetings, demonstrations. We need every time we see an Israeli flag lifted on the town hall square, in the internet, whatever it is, Twitter, Instagram, this warms our hearts. This shows that we are not alone. And we know we're not alone, but sometimes we need to hear that from you. So thank you so much for tuning in today, and see you again tomorrow, 1 o'clock, Jerusalem time. And remember, those who pray for the peace of Jerusalem will prosper.